Okay. So thanks again for the opportunity to present. I think this is the fourth global webinar that I've done over the last couple of years at least. So I appreciate the opportunity again. So today I'm going to talk about electronic evidence management from the forensic perspective. Again, I'm the EVP of Forensics and Chief Investigative Officer for Page One, which is an e-discovery services firm that's based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I am in New York. So we're going to do a little bit of an introduction, talk about some proper evidence handling, documentation, organization, communication, and then some takeaways. So a little bit about me. I've been in the industry for now 23 years, and that experience has been either educational by way of working as a computer crime specialist with the National White Collar Crime Center in West Virginia. I am a native New Yorker, but I've also worked at different e-discovery services firms. And in probably the last decade and a half, last 15 years or so, I've been more on the leadership side of things. I am the practice leader currently where I'm at. And my role generally on the day to day is to build the practice, oversee the daily operations, design forensic labs and teams, and all the other things that come along with that. And have a background in forensic science by way of a bachelor's and master's from the University of New Haven, a licensed private investigator in New York, Michigan, South Carolina, and soon to be some other states. Uh, Also interesting is that I've taken the opportunity over the last few years to write a series of books called Forensic Data Collections 2.0. There's one main one that I started with, and then a second series that includes a lot of my trusted content that's out there. I write for PI Magazine and some other industry publications. So, want to talk about this important topic today, but you can't talk about evidence without talking about integrity, right? The whole foundation of digital forensics is to ensure that the evidence that you are either taking possession of or examining has uh, the ability to be admissible in a court of law. So the way that we do that is we use a series of defined processes, and we also focus in on documentation. By way of documentation, we're talking about chain of custody, acquisition forms, data collection logs, disposition forms, all these things that are obviously important here that we're going to get into. But the whole goal is to make sure that while the media, that the device is in your possession, the integrity of that device, the data on that device is going to be maintained throughout its life cycle. I usually say to people that chain of custody and that documentation is so critical that without documentation, there is no evidence. In managing teams over the years, I stress the importance of documenting. That's why we get brought in, because ultimately somebody wants to use this data for a project that is obviously going to be transcending my particular organization with the end goal of being produced and presented in a court of law. So as you can imagine, over the years, as long as I've been involved in this, there's always been significant changes, right? We have lots of different types of electronic evidence that are encountered in matters, and the data volumes have increased substantially, exponentially. So, in order for us to kind of deal with this, we have to put in place and have very robust processes that allow us to be able to perform tasks, right? And so everybody kind of has to work together in order to do this type of work. And that includes having proper evidence handling, the documentation that's involved here, the organization, which is not just about the people involved, it's also about the different workflows that need to be executed on, how people are obviously doing that together. And then, equally as important, effective communication. Because if there's any breakdown or uncertainties, that could be challenging, especially for certain cases that need to be worked on and obviously take very high priority. Again, depending on the nature of the case, but each case is significant and very important. So, in terms of proper evidence handling, one of the things that we need to be considerate about is on the electronic side, documenting the power state of the device. So, is it on or is it off? Sometimes it's difficult to tell because the device may be physically damaged or may have some physical issues with it. And then on the electronic side, also, static discharge could occur. And I've seen this happen. And unfortunately, in the private sector, sometimes when we have to go on site and do this, we can't really control the environments that we go into. We ask for staging areas, work areas, but sometimes those areas are carpeted. And I've seen instances where if you're not taking proper precaution, that could damage evidence by way of walking on carpet and now touching maybe the bottom of a hard drive where the board's exposed, and you can see that happen real time. And if that's the only copy of the evidence and that's your original evidence, that's not a good thing. So placing the device in airplane mode is another type of way that we control the device, the source, data, make sure the integrity is preserved. And this is particularly important with mobile devices. And what this allows us to do is control any communications with any type of radio signals, and also prevents any type of external wiping or remote wiping that may occur if the device is still online. And so we want to take all these different precautions. Proper evidence handling also involves leveraging forensic hardware and software, and that is different types of either devices or tools that can be leveraged in following forensic guidelines, best practices, where metadata is preserved, and ensuring that during the time that any processes are being performed with regards to imaging or collecting the data from those particular devices or media, that all that is going to be preserved by way of leveraging a write blocker, software write blocker, hardware write blocker, which prevents writes back to the source device or data. So very, very important to leverage good and proper evidence handling techniques. So, in addition to that is also leveraging a storage location or container that allows you to keep the evidence in a controlled environment. So what that means is you can't just have an environment whereas the device or the media is not going to be able to have optimal conditions. We need to put it in a temperature controlled environment. You don't want to keep this sitting on a windowsill in the dead of summer. You don't want to be putting this in a location where obviously others can touch it as well as have access to it. So you want to have a secure, controlled environment in order to preserve this in its original state. Documentation is really a primary element of all this. Like I said, no documentation, no evidence. It must be thorough and meticulous. I always say to people that the way that you document and what you document is so important because what we're dealing with today may not need to be spoken about or revisited until years from now. So, what you may recall and have fresh in your mind is something that is not guaranteed, and you can be called to testify at any time. The amount of cases that we all work, and the stakes are very high, and it's easy to take a moment to write down these things that are happening, the processes that you performed. And the one thing that I feel is really important to stress, especially with the newer, generation of examiners that are coming into the workforce, is the importance that not everything needs to be digital. So, printing up a form in hard copy allows you to focus. Don't worry so much about your handwriting, just make sure that you're getting this documentation done, and you can always transcribe later because everything needs to be kind of digitized anyway. But being able to focus in on this stresses also the importance of this because so much of it is, hey, you need to get this done really quick. We don't have much time. But I want people to realize how important this piece is because I've testified for a very lengthy amount of time on the stand on chain of custody, how I got in possession of information, the data, the devices, the media. And people want to always particularly poke holes in that. So very, very important. Documentation could be generated by the examiner or by the tools that are leveraged in the process with the evidence. So forensic imaging software could do this, or collection software, or processes that are just being followed and executed, even batch files that can be used as long as you're writing that information down or it's being logged or audited. That's what you really need to do. You need to show consistent process so that you can review those logs and that information to ensure that everything that you've done is successful, or if it's not successful, to be able to say why you had to redo anything or follow a different path. The obvious example of this is a chain of custody form, which records the transfer of possession between parties of devices and media that are applicable to the evidence. So this form is so important that it needs to be followed with the evidence wherever it goes from cradle to grave for its entire life cycle of the matter at hand. So anytime that somebody does any work on it internally, if you're moving it from the storage container to the examination workstation, document that transfer. If it needs to move from the evidence custodian to another part of the lab, document that transfer. If it's going from the lab to the client or to investigator, that needs to be done. There also needs to be SOPs, standard operating procedure documents. And what's really important here is that SOPs are standard. They're controlled. People are following the same process. Either they are working through a process based on the step by step, or if they need to deviate in any way, they can escalate this. But ensuring standards are met and there's consistency amongst a team is really the function, the purpose of SOPs. This way, if an examiner on my team runs through a process to do a collection, I can easily speak to that process because there's a SOP for that. Most everything related to evidence management, handling, all the way through should have a workflow or a process that's documented and followed by all. Also, here is organization, and this is equally as important because you're going to have all these documents that are filled out, hard copy documents that are speaking to the various activities. They ultimately will get filed. Sometimes you put those in manila folders and it's kept in a storage location within the lab or within the organization. But 9 times, and many cases 10 times out of 10, this is being digitized. It's being scanned to digital format where it's being OCR'd, which is optical character recognition. And that allows us to be able to index the words on those pages and search against that within a repository to identify what is going on with that piece of evidence at any time. Now, in terms of keeping organized, a lot of organizations leverage spreadsheets to track evidence. And that's okay. I mean, there's nothing particularly wrong with that. But these documents are static, right? They constantly need to kind of be opened. There's copies that exist. They're susceptible to being accessed by the wrong parties. They can also become corrupt. Just a lot of challenges, that come around, come about when you're talking about leveraging a thing like a spreadsheet to track evidence. There is really more of a need now to provide real-time updates, right? I mean, everybody has access to computers and phones and ways for us to get in touch with one another that at any given time, especially in the field that we're in, things can happen at any time and we may get called in at any time to assist. People want information real time. And so, that's also not just from your client perspective, but also operationally in my company, data may need to move along to the next stage that later that day. And so people are always wanting to be in touch to understand, where are you at with this? And either it's through email or picking up the phone, but being able to give real-time results or information is really important. So a lot of times a central repository or a solution such as that is used to track activities related to that piece of evidence. And that central repository should not only just be access to, given access to members of the lab or evidence custodian, but other teams, with particular permissions, either to prevent, any modifications to any records or have access to only specific cases that individuals are involved in. But it gives people the opportunity to have streamlined information. One of the things that's really important, and I've done this for a long time with many different organizations, and I can tell you that in every organization that I've been a part of, the type of repository or format that evidence management is within could go anywhere from spreadsheets to systems to databases. More organizations, in my experience, have kind of engaged with tech gurus, developers internally to say, hey, this is our data. Let's find a unique way to track it. Um, my opinion, now that I have the ability to influence some of those decisions and workflows and kind of bring best practices into the mix, is to say there are evidence management solutions out there which put guardrails on how personnel and team members throughout an organization interact with the evidence. And why this is crucial is because, more and more there's a lot of scrutiny about the security of data, the hypersensitivity going on. We're not just talking about, data that's sitting on hard drives anymore. It could be up in the cloud. So people really want to know, not only what you collected, what you're in possession of, but are you following specific guidelines that are best practices to ensure, remember, the end goal of all this is to have the data admissible in a court of law. And one of those standards is the ISO 17025, which specifies the different types of quality management and technical requirements that lab personnel are required to follow for this accreditation, ensuring that the lab produces results that are accurate, reliable, and reproducible. So this standard and this accreditation is a good kind of foundation to kind of allow the lab personnel to follow those guidelines, and having a evidence management solution that's based on those particular requirements is extremely valuable. However, like we all know, change can be difficult for organizations, and they may not want to invest in that, especially if other types of repositories have been in place for years. So they kind of go a different direction. If that is the case, it's really important and it would be ideal to engage with a digital forensic practitioner to design and or select a solution that has those best practices in mind. Fortunately, over the last several years, I've been involved in build outs of two particular labs, and I've been able to bring in an evidence management solution out of the gate, which has been fantastic. And this is a very big investment and very big asset value add when you're able to bring in something like this and people understand the true value of the advantage of having such a platform in place. Communication is extremely important for evidence management, and sometimes the evidence management solution help streamline this. And if you can think of all the different stages, phases of evidence management, it starts at intake, right, where you get the evidence, how it may be collected, and then how it's transferred. Like I said before, the transfers can happen, for example, for an examination. You get the evidence in, it needs to be examined. Or it could be from an external perspective, you're done with your examination, the client would like their data disposed of. Maybe it gets deleted, maybe it gets sent back, um, maybe it gets physically destroyed, or maybe they ask you to store it. It just depends on what they want to do. But you got to dispose of the evidence somehow. And this is all part of that. There are multiple teams involved in this. In certain organizations, it could even involve the finance team, because if we're storing the evidence, there's a cost associated with storing evidence, and everybody needs to be in agreement for that disposition process to be completed effectively. The collaboration is really essential. I think that these systems help in that regard. I think that if somebody wants to find real-time information out, it's extremely valuable. And I think that internally, it allows all the different stakeholders, because when you do an investigation, for example, it may involve legal teams, it may involve IT teams, stakeholders, and then you may also have people outside the organization that are involved as well. We work with inside counsel, outside counsel. And so having that collaborative communication about evidence is important so that everybody can be on the same page, but also it raises awareness and allows you to also understand that this is a process that is taken seriously, and it's not just a matter of we get your data and we're going to let you know when we're done with it. Every step of the way needs to be audited and communicated out uh, at any time based on the nature of the case. So the goal of evidence management is to ensure that the electronic evidence that you're uh, working on or have taken possession on or possession of is relevant, that proper documentation has been followed throughout, and then ultimately the end goal here is that it's admissible in court. So some key takeaways from the presentation today that I wanted to share is that evidence integrity is paramount. Being able to say that nothing changed in terms of the source data while it was in your possession is really important. The documentation is your guarantee that the data will be admissible in court. And that documentation, even if there was a issue at some point, document it. You need to also realize that there are solutions out there that are constantly evolving. Those evidence management systems that I was talking to you about, they're SaaS based a lot of the time. So it's not just a static system. They're constantly evolving to add additional information, functionality, right? It's software as a service. They get updated. Information can be kept up there. A lot of times they're using secure cloud, like AWS Cloud, for example. And you have to be open to that. And for a long time, I always questioned the security of cloud and whether or not a lot of clients would go for that. And every circumstance is different. But when I'm talking about an evidence management solution, talking about leveraging that for evidence management in and of itself. And if you keep information about a matter up there, it's going to be like the metadata for the matter. It's going to be matter name, maybe some specific types of evidence that you have, the media that's involved. But the data itself doesn't always have to go up into this platform. Obviously, you want to discuss that with clients and lab personnel on the best practices for that lab. But again, these are kind of functions that are now available to us. More importantly than anything is that chain of custody, where it goes from point A to point B, et cetera, right? That chain is ever broken, that data may not be admissible in a court of law. So that's my presentation for you today. You can reach out to me at any time, either through LinkedIn, where I'm pretty prolific and put a lot of thought leadership out there. Uh, Mostly every week, put some snippets of information out there, or through email at rfried@page1legal.com.